Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to another episode of The Raw Men. And this one is timely, I think, because on Monday, which is from this point, June 27th, the still even-numbered Supreme Court will rule on Texas House Bill 2. And this is the one, if you're aware of Wendy Davis, this is the one where she famously filibustered for like 11 hours or so. And to discuss the ramifications of that Supreme Court decision nationwide, I'm going to be speaking with a representative of NARAL. And oh my gosh, what does NARAL mean? And Zoe is your name. I'm not even going to try to pronounce the last one. Please help me out with that.
I'm actually Heather Busby. Zoe is my communications coordinator who set this up.
Right. She is on the roster as that she was supposed to be on. Is she not going to be joining us today?
I don't think so.
Okay. Well, I wish she'd mentioned your name too, so I could
sorry.
I could have put it in the video description. But
no problem.
NARAL. What is NARAL?
So NARAL ProChoice Texas is the Texas affiliate of what the acronym used to stand for is the National Abortion and Reproductive Rights Action League. We are a statewide advocacy organization that fights for the right of everyone in the state of Texas to decide for themselves whether, when, and how to parent, and to do so with dignity and respect. And we do that by going through the political process, the legislative process, engaging and educating people around the state on reproductive rights, health, and justice issues. And, our goal is to keep slogging away and change the laws in Texas to actually support people's reproductive decision making.
Well, you've got quite a challenge in Texas, don't you?
Yeah, we do.
So I mean, it just seems like they're systematically trying to shut down. This is what I notice. I notice that the religious right, wherever they can, they say that they want small government, but they want government that legislates what everybody does in the bedroom, and that governs over your sexual orientation, among other things. And so they censor sex education, and they cut access to contraception, and they illegalize abortions however they can, and then when they put on all these other restrictions, the inevitable result is that you end up with more teen pregnancies, and then we end up with this ridiculous rate of childhood poverty that we have in this state. And then when they realize what their positive feedback loop has caused, then they exacerbate it by cutting social welfare programs that would have benefited to teen mothers and so forth. This is how to just make everything worse.
Yeah. Well, I do want to clarify a point that we're not just talking about teenagers. And yes, Texas does have one of the highest rates of teen pregnancy and repeat teen pregnancies, but I don't want to stigmatize teen parents by saying that teen pregnancy equals child poverty, because that's not necessarily true. I also don't want to give the false impression that most of the people having abortions are teenagers, because we know that not to be true. It's more likely going to be someone in their 20s or early 30s. 60% of the people who have abortions already have children. They're parents. They're making this decision from the perspective of a parent. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that, you're right, Texas doesn't support families. We have one of the highest rates of child poverty in the state, and we have the highest number of uninsured people. We don't take care of our own here, even though the state has the resources to do so. We're not doing it. We're not educating our children. We're not feeding our families. We have some of the highest rates of hunger in the nation. So, you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. We don't educate people on how to prevent pregnancy. We don't give them access to family planning and contraceptives that would be most effective, the ones that they want. Long-acting contraceptives. We don't have a solid program to provide that to the people in the state. And then once you can't access an abortion, if that's what you decide to do, and then you have a child that you can't afford and you have no support in doing so. So yeah, it's just not a great situation to be raising a family in Texas.
So with regard to House Bill 2, just to bring people up who aren't in Texas and who aren't familiar with the local names, I mentioned Wendy Davis a moment ago. Do you mind telling the story? Do you want me to?
I'm happy to. So yeah, House Bill 2 is the bill that ultimately passed. It's an omnibus abortion restriction bill targeted at abortion providers. So it bans abortions after 20 weeks. It requires that all physicians performing abortions have admitting privileges within 30 miles, at a hospital within 30 miles of the clinic where the abortion is to be performed. It requires doctors to follow the final labeling protocol of the FDA for medication abortion or abortion with pills. Fortunately, the FDA recently updated those to follow the evidence-based protocol, so that part of the bill has basically been rendered mostly ineffective. And then it also requires all of the facilities in Texas that perform abortions, whether or not they're just giving out medication, they're just giving out pills, or performing a abortion procedure with a surgical procedure, then they have to meet the standards of what are called ambulatory surgical centers or mini hospitals. So this bill was introduced in the first special session. So keep in mind that during the regular session of the Texas legislature in 2013, all of these provisions were introduced by themselves as independent bills. None of them made it to the floor of either chamber for debate. None of them made it anywhere in the legislature. So that was the political will. Rick Perry, who was then governor, was not satisfied with that. He called a special session. He added the ability for the legislature to add abortion restrictions during the special session, and then SB 5 was introduced, this omnibus bill. And we started off with what we call the People's Filibuster, which was a House State Affairs hearing that went well into the night. Hundreds and hundreds of people showed up to testify, to buy more time. We needed to buy an extra day to get to the final day of the session, which ends at midnight on the 30th day. And that allowed State Senator Wendy Davis to filibuster the bill. And she did. She spoke for 13 hours on the floor, and we got down to 11:45 p.m., and they were going to call a vote on the bill. They could have passed the bill in that last 15 minutes of the night, but the people of Texas started yelling and stomping and chanting and clapping and making so much noise that they could not hear and take the vote. And
I want to throw something out here, but from what I saw, that it was a brilliant thing when she started this filibuster, wearing a catheter, by the way, just so that she could not have to have a restroom break, because of course you can't do that during a filibuster. So she put in this regulation. Then the gallery had slowly filled during this time with somewhere estimated between 800 and 1,100 people, if I remember this correctly. So I mean, there's a hell of a lot of people in the Capitol building at that time.
It was more in the thousands, because we filled the entire building. They shut the door. Building. Yeah, it wasn't just the gallery. It wasn't the gallery. It was the entire building was full.
Outstanding.
And it's a big building.
So they had these cameras. They'd always have cameras on, but I guess most of the time nobody's paying attention. But at this particular moment, there were 180,000 people watching online. And so when they come to the last 15 minutes, this was a dramatic thing. I remember people just like notifying each other all over social media. You got to watch this. Watch what she's doing. And so I mean, you gather 180,000 people watching, and they get into that last 15 minutes where they finally found some loophole by which they could end her filibuster, and it was still 15 minutes to go. Mm-hmm. And then there was a number of other people that stepped up to stall for her and to hold things off to the last couple of minutes. And then when they tried to do the vote anyway, as you say, the crowd lit up, and it was pandemonium. And then this was a noticeable thing. This was, I think the lieutenant governor was Dewhurst?
Yes.
Right? Okay, so
David Dewhurst.
So he doesn't get the vote done until after midnight, and so he forges the document. He falsifies the government document to say that it was done on the previous date. And it took 2 or 3 hours in private chambers to explain to him that there was 180,000 people that had already screenshotted what he was doing, and that there was no way he was going to be able to get away with that. Why this man never faced charges? Well, I guess because our politicians are untouchable. They can do whatever they want. And it doesn't matter how many witnesses or what kind of public record we have of what they did. They just skirt free. So then she was successful. And this was a huge thing, very celebratory, people very excited. But then, of course, our beloved governor forces another special session the next day. Wasn't it the next day?
It was he announced it the very next day, yes.
Yeah, he announced it the very next day. So it didn't matter, this heroic effort, that he was going to squish it anyway. And he did this while saying that he was doing it out of respect for women. And this also, coincidentally, happened to be the same day that he had executed his 500th victim in the penal system, and it happened to be a woman. coincidentally. I don't have a lot of love from our former governor or
Yeah,
our present one. If they
agreed.
Yeah, so anyway, Wendy Davis became quite famous for this heroic act and actually ran for governor. But it happened to be during an election period where we had a record, not record voter turnout, but record voter apathy,
Hmm.
where everybody's saying that both parties are the same and there's no purpose in voting. It's a broken, so that they basically ruined the election, so that we now have much worse people in power than we had previously. So if you ever say that it's a broken system, there's no, I mean, no, you're part of the problem. All right, getting back to you, since we brought people up to speed on that, what is where is this bill now, and where's it going to be?
So House Bill 2 is mostly has gone into effect with the exception of that mini hospital requirement that all clinics have to meet the standards of many hospitals and have certain hallway widths and certain air circulation, male and female locker rooms, big janitorial closets, stock a bunch of medicines you would never ever need when performing an abortion or even with an abortion complication, etc. So that's the only one that's blocked, and except for admitting privileges as applied to the Whole Woman's Health Clinic in McAllen and the El Paso Reproductive Services Clinic in El Paso. So those two clinics are open, even though their physicians there don't have admitting privileges because of the Supreme Court stay. And so the case was heard March 2nd. We'll get the decision on Monday, June 27th. And we'll know then what happens if it's a 4-4 split. Then what happens in Texas? And it doesn't have any national precedents, but in Texas we will be down to 10 clinics or fewer in the entire state. So every provision of House Bill 2 will be in effect essentially. And if the Supreme Court strikes down those provisions of the law, there's any number of possible scenarios, but hopefully that will, at the very least, ensure that the existing clinics in the state, which are now down to only 18, will remain open.
Okay, so what?
The main part of HB2 that has closed down so many Texas clinics is admitting privileges, right?
Yes, absolutely. And so what people don't understand, like it seems, if you don't know anything about it, you think, oh, well, of course they should have admitting privileges at a hospital. That means they're a good doctor. But really what it's doing is giving hospital boards a veto over whether or not someone can perform abortions. So they can deny even sending an application to a physician, which is what we found in areas like McAllen, where it has nothing to do with the physician's competence or anything of that nature. It's about the hospital not wanting, because of stigma, because of harassment, not wanting to have an abortion doctor with admitting privileges in their hospital. The other thing is that abortion is a very, very safe procedure. It has one of the lowest rates of major complication of any outpatient procedure. And so doctors aren't admitting their patients to hospitals. And hospitals grant admitting privileges to doctors that bring them business. It's a business decision. It's not a medical decision. And so because of that, we've seen, even in the remaining clinics, reduced capacity of those clinics because the doctors, they don't have enough doctors to keep up with the need for abortion care. And so in many cities, including Austin and Dallas, there can be up to a 20-day wait just to get the first appointment. And you keep in mind there's a 24-hour waiting period, so you need 2 appointments to get a first trimester abortion.
I wanted to ask a quick question about that.
Sure.
Do you know of any cases of women that have been unable to get an abortion they needed because of these extended wait times?
Yeah, absolutely. There are folks who have not been able to get to their appointment, and those who have the resources or are able, with the organizations that exist, abortion funds, to help them leave the state of Texas. That's one thing. I know I have several friends who have found themselves in a situation where they would be pushed so far into pregnancy because of the waiting periods that they might be either beyond the 20 weeks or just further into the second trimester, and they weren't willing or able to do that and had the resources to leave the state. So there are folks who've flown to California, to New York, to Seattle, to Oregon, to Florida, gone to New Mexico, other states that don't have these same restrictions, and so they're able to access abortion.
I heard of one unfortunate story of a woman who had to give birth to a stillborn child because of the waiting periods.
Yeah. Well, it's that story. I saw that was on Reddit. I think it was here in Austin, where the couple, she was basically miscarrying, but the hospital felt they couldn't do anything to assist her because the fetus still had a heartbeat, and they considered that an abortion. And even though there was no chance of that, resulting in a viable child at the end of the pregnancy, she was miscarrying and had to wait for the fetus to die before the hospital could help her. And that's a substantial health risk, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And quite an amazing story on when an abortion is going to be performed. That should be ideally earlier, is better, and most people want to get that done as early as possible. So it seems a little insidious to me to prolong that and to have people have to go through these extra steps for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Traditionally, the majority of abortions that occur are in the first trimester, the first 8 weeks of pregnancy. That's when any risk of complication is lowest. Many people will choose to have abortion with pills. Keep in mind that after HB2 went into effect and before the FDA updated the protocol, the use of medication abortion in Texas reduced by 70%, 70%, which is huge because nationwide you see that trending up. People having earlier abortions, choosing to have a medication abortion, and in Texas that went the opposite way.
So a medication abortion wouldn't be the invasive surgical procedure that everybody would rather avoid, right?
Right. Well, I mean, it just depends. And it's a matter of personal preference. There are pros and cons to each. The surgical procedure is normally a suction, and it takes on average 5 minutes. But some people don't want to do that. The medication abortion is more along the lines of a miscarriage. You can do that in your home with people around you that you choose to at a time and place that's right for you. And some people like that option better.
Okay, so this bill it had the effect then of shutting down most of the abortion clinics all across the state. So that I think that the original projection would be that in the entire state of Texas, which is 850 miles wide, there would be only 4 basically abortion clinics that would still be in operation. Is that right?
Well, so I think it was either 4 or 5 at the time the bill was introduced.
Mm-hmm.
Since then, some providers have been able to open up new facilities, and so now we're up to 9 ambulatory surgical centers in Texas. But that's still a really, really low number. We went from 42 in May of 2013 down to 18 today, and then cutting that in half again to 9 would be absolutely devastating. Yeah, and really. Also, fewer cities have abortion clinics than they did in 2013.
Yeah, and you have to remember, for those not familiar with Texas, how many huge metroplex centers we have.
Mm-hmm.
Like Houston is at least the size of London. So,
right.
And you were saying that there were 2 clinics on the border of Texas that are just being kept open provisionally, even though they don't have admitting privileges.
Right.
And if those 2 clinics close, then how are these women? Texas is a huge state, and sometimes people come across the border to get a safe abortion in these border towns. How many? Probably millions of women are going to lose access in that region.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, right now we have the entirety of the Panhandle in West Texas except for El Paso. All of those clinics were forced to close. We lost clinics in East Texas. The Beaumont Clinic closed, the Bryan College Station Clinic closed. And so that doesn't just affect Texans, but also pregnant people in Louisiana who were dependent upon that facility for their abortion care, because Louisiana, as we know, is also incredibly hostile to reproductive rights. And so that would leave the entirety, like we would not have a clinic west of San Antonio if HB2 goes into full effect. The Rio Grande Valley also would have no clinics. And keep in mind that when you're in the valley and you're going to drive up to San Antonio, you pass an immigration checkpoint. So think about the folks who don't have documentation to get past that checkpoint and how that affects them, or even if they have the documentation, don't have the resources to make a 4 to 5 hour drive to access the closest clinic.
So the laws we're talking...
And make 2 appointments too, right?
Well, if you live more than 100 miles from a clinic, the waiting period goes from 24 to, I want to say, 2 hours. It's either 2 or 4 hour wait instead. So you could do it the same day technically. You still have to sit there in the clinic and wait extra, which is just awful. But at least there's that small exception. Although, you know, it's entirely possible that next legislative session they'll take that away. They've made noise in the past about wanting to get rid of what they consider a loophole to the 24-hour wait.
Okay, so we're talking about targeted regulation of abortion providers, and now the Supreme Court, these are now being referred to as trap laws.
Right.
And so the Supreme Court is ruling on whether that's going to be constitutional, which means it's going to be implemented if they say that it is. Then this isn't just a Texas story anymore. It becomes nationwide.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, what the outcome of the Supreme Court case could affect many other states, and you know, I would love to see a strong decision that leads to a domino of other states challenging their laws and knocking out these restrictions, because what happens in Texas hasn't stayed in Texas. It didn't even originate in Texas. This is a nationwide strategy to eradicate access to abortion. If they can't make it illegal, if they will make it inaccessible, and they've been swift and efficient and effective at doing that. You see entire states that have maybe one provider or no provider. You know, it's becoming harder and harder to access abortion care nationwide.
Well, that seems to be the only thing that they are efficient at getting legislation on.
Right. Taking care of kids, not so much.
Yeah, we will shut down the government just to prevent people from getting health care.
Yeah.
You know, we will hold sit-ins and cut the cameras and cut the microphones if they want to try to even discuss what would be common sense legislation on gun regulations and so forth.
Right.
You know, we just can't come up with a smart decision. But you know,
abortion is not illegal, but with these trap laws in different states, what do you know about illegal procedures? Have they gone up to get abortions because of access issues?
Yeah, we do know that people are self-inducing, and you know, I hesitate to use the word illegal, maybe not state sanctioned, but I feel like pregnant people who are in desperate circumstances shouldn't be, you know, criminalized in that way or punished, as one certain Cheeto presidential candidate has said. So. We do know that people are self-inducing. There is knowledge on how to do that safely and effectively. If you can access the medications, you know, the World Health Organization, you can find out how to do it at their website. And there's an organization called Women on Web that's out in Europe that also has really good information on medication abortion, essentially. And so, you know, we know that that's happening. I can't speak to the rates, of course. You know, when something is outside of or in the shadows, it's harder to give an accurate picture of that. But we have some data that shows that people have at least attempted or considered self-induction in Texas.
However, I know that there's knowledge on how to do this more safely, but it not being performed by a doctor and often people who aren't trained. Doesn't that increase the risk of people getting injured and hurt? And doesn't it increase unsafe abortions not to have access to a medically performed abortion?
Yeah, absolutely. Whether it's a medication abortion or some of the other, you know, somewhat devastating ways that people are trying to self-induce. You know, we hear stories of people asking their boyfriend to punch them in the stomach, or, you know, taking herbs and doing things that could be very dangerous and harmful to them. You know, we want them to be able to access the medical care in the way that's best for them. You know, if someone chooses a medication abortion, to be able to consult with a physician to diagnose that, you know, it was a successful termination, to diagnose the pregnancy, to make sure it's not an ectopic pregnancy, to make sure they're getting the best care that they can. Obviously, that is the access to health care is the most important piece of this. And whether it's an abortion clinic or just being able to access health care at all in a state that refuses to expand Medicaid, that has some of the highest or the highest rate of uninsured in the nation, you know, it's a tragedy.
So you mentioned a moment ago about a Cheeto presidential candidate, and that sounds to me like a racial pejorative against orange people.
I apologize to all orange people. You're not being well represented by
So speaking of well represented, let's say that this particular Cheeto is elected. Now what are you up against? Or does the Supreme Court override that pending issue?
Well, funny you mentioned the Supreme Court, because we currently have a vacancy that the Senate is not doing their job in holding nomination hearings for.
But they can do all this legislation for abortion. Why can't they come up with a Supreme Court justice? Haven't they already had them recommended? Don't we have any kind of efficiency in our government at all? Does the Republican Party do anything but obfuscate and be obstinate and obstructionist? Never mind, I'll get.
I know. I'm going to assume all these are rhetorical questions, and that everyone knows the answer to them. Yeah, the next president is likely to appoint at least one, if not multiple, justices during their term, and if that happens to be the talking to pay that is currently on the Republican side, it will be devastating, not just for access to abortion care, but every single social justice issue we care about, and frankly, the health of our nation. I mean, this is a guy that drives companies into bankruptcy, who can't even run in his own campaign effectively and raise money. It is people, please turn out and vote.
Yes, I think we all agree on that one. Honey, what would you want to add to that?
Just to kind of pivot here, I just want people to get a better understanding of why this ruling is so important. Why did the Supreme Court choose Texas's House Bill 2 of all the other states that had trap laws? What was special about it?
So yeah, there were other cases waiting in the wings. They didn't take up the Mississippi case, for example, which was had similar. The admitting privileges requirement was at the Fifth Circuit, and they didn't combine the cases. They just took up Whole Woman's Health v. Hellerstedt. I think that it's really, of all the cases, of all the illustrations in the nation, you have here the second most populous, the second geographically largest state in the country with a high population. We would have almost 1 million females of reproductive age living more than 150 miles from a clinic if HB2 were to go into full effect. And so I think that I'm glad they took up this particular case, because it really, really shows in some of the most stark, obvious ways in which making access to abortion care is harmful and contradictive to the stated purpose. They said it was about women's health and safety. We knew that was a lie, a sham from the beginning, and the purpose was to close down clinics, and that's exactly what the law did. It has no connection, the effect has no connection to the stated purpose. No medical evidence of improved health and safety outcomes. No evidence at all to support what the legislators said this bill was about.
So
after Roe versus Wade, abortion became legal in the United States, but then right after that there was another decision that said that we could pass laws regulating abortion as long as they didn't create an undue burden. So is that part of the reason why they picked Texas? Because that's the best example of how these laws place an undue burden on the ability to access an abortion?
Yeah, so that was the Planned Parenthood v. Casey decision in 1992 that changed from a trimester framework under Roe versus Wade to this undue burden, which is still, we don't know exactly what an undue burden is. The jurisprudence is not very clear. So I can't speculate as to why the Supreme Court decided to take up this case and only this case. But it is definitely an illustration of how undue the burdens are. And so, I hope, I just have a lot of hope for this case and for
I'm going to
Monday.
ask you to speculate.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you to speculate, make a prediction, but before the prediction, speculate both ways, both decisions that the Supreme Court, you expect the Supreme Court might make. And what do you predict would be the reasons and the result for either decision?
I think there's 3 decisions, right?
There are at least 3 possible outcomes, and
Okay.
if you're really into Supreme Court jurisprudence and constitutional law, many possible scenarios that could play out depending on how they rule.
What do you predict then?
So I am going to be optimistic and predict hopefully not a 4-4 split, which would be devastating for Texas. That's our loss scenario. I think it's very, very unlikely to have a 5-3 loss scenario, given that we are down 1 justice, and 4-4 is the worst.
Which justice it was?
Scalia. So I think that there will likely be at least a 5-3 decision. That's my prediction, just my prediction, speculation. I don't know to what lengths the court will go to define an undue burden. My hope is that the court will issue a strong opinion saying that state legislatures cannot single out abortion care for regulation with a purpose that is in no way related to the effect, and define it that way, that the effect and the purpose have to be connected, and otherwise it's unconstitutional and does pose an undue burden. That's what I really hope to see. I hope to see a strong opinion. It is possible, because we need to get Justice Kennedy on our side to get that 5-3, that the opinion might be more compromised, maybe kick the can down the road a little further. I can't say exactly what it'll be. I'm not a constitutional scholar. I do have a law degree, but this is advocacy has been more my bag than constitutional law.
So if we get the 4-4 split, what happens then?
What happens then is that the public health crisis, as far as reproductive health is concerned and our families are concerned, will continue. And we have many great organizations, abortion funds, advocacy groups, providers working really hard to serve the people of Texas who need reproductive health care, but it's not enough. And it won't be enough until we're able to overturn these restrictions and turn the tide and create an environment of justice, of support, of compassion, so that people can access the health care they need with dignity. And that is going to be a long road, and it's really tough and tiring. I'm tired, but we have to keep going. We have to keep paying attention. We have to keep up in this fight, regardless of what happens. And even if we have the best possible scenario on Monday and we get a really strong opinion, the fight goes on. We still have many other restrictions in Texas. We still have a waiting period. We still have mandatory sonograms. We still have really devastating restrictions on minors' access to abortion care, and a devastation of the judicial bypass process, which is set up to help minors access abortion. For
people outside the state or outside the U.S. who might happen to catch that, can you explain what these waiting periods and the sonograms and the other things, what are these requirements that women have to go through?
Right. So if you are seeking an abortion in Texas, you have to go at least 24 hours before your abortion procedure and have a mandatory sonogram. And the same physician who's going to perform the abortion has to explain that sonogram to you. They are forced to give their patients information that they know to not be medically or scientifically accurate. Lies from the anti-choice movement, like abortion causes breast cancer, it causes depression. All of these things have been refuted time and time again.
Yeah, and I spoke about this once upon a time on stage, where we have medical professionals required to give misinformation, to deliberately mislead.
Right. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then don't they have something else about like like having to sit in a child's room or having to experience motherhood in some way, name the baby before before they make this decision? There was some kind of restrained requirement that they had poised.
It was not in Texas, fortunately, but
Oh,
give it
okay.
time. I think that's another state where there. I mean, there was an Onion article. I think,
Yeah.
life
It's so
imitating
hard to tell.
satire. Yeah, yeah. But there are states that require like funeral proceedings essentially for every single abortion and miscarriage, which the practicality, the expense of that is
And then some people
yeah.
were talking about also, and this was not an Onion article, I know.
Mhm.
They were talking about, criminal investigations for every miscarriage.
Right. I mean, that could be the road we go down. You're already seeing women being criminalized for miscarriage. Look at Purvi Patel in Indiana, who's currently serving time for having had a miscarriage. She was prosecuted for both feticide um, and for neglect. So they couldn't make up their mind, and so she ended up being prosecuted and convicted of two crimes that contradict each other. So the injustice is particularly against women of color. This is already happening in America today.
Hmm. All right. So, if is there anything else we need to cover, or shall we get to final words?
Uh,
Um,
just a minute.
yeah.
If we get the decision we want and it's 5-3, uh, will a lot of abortion clinics be able to open again? And also, will abortion clinics that were closed in other states, will that make it unconstitutional in every state to have trap laws?
So, if it's a really strong opinion, it could strike down other states' trap laws. Um, it could allow more clinics to open up in Texas and in other states as well. Keep in mind, though, that it is not that easy because the clinics still have to get licensed by the state. And I guarantee our current Department of Health and Human Services is not going to be, rushing out to grant new licenses to abortion providers. We have structurally in every aspect of Texas government is stacked against us. So there's that challenge. There's the challenge of getting a facility, and then you have landlords who are gun shy about renting to abortion providers because of stigma, because of harassment. And then you have, you've got to hire staff. I mean, it's not going to happen overnight. You break a system, it's not immediately repaired. And the best example of that is 2011. The Texas legislature cut family planning funds by 2/3 in an attempt to attack Planned Parenthood. Lost the federal Medicaid women's health program, which Texas got $9 for every dollar they spent on family planning. And we saw since 2011 more than 80 family planning clinics have closed across the state. And despite the fact that they keep trying to put money back into that system, that system has not repaired. We're still not serving the needs of people needing to access contraception in Texas. So I would predict the same for abortion care. It's not going to be an overnight turning of the tide.
Yeah,
It's a long fight.
and probably the only good
There's
news on
still
that.
a lot left to fight against.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Probably the only good news on that is that Obama just a few months ago, finally signed off or to illegalize or cut funding for, rather, the abstinence-only sex education program because of what a
Yeah.
phenomenal failure that was. As you mentioned, Texas has the highest rate of repeat teen pregnancies. And I actually saw a news story. This is not a joke either. This unfortunately was real. This was a news story that said that there was a notice in statistical trends for teen pregnancies dropped off once the teens got to be 25 years old.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
I actually taught in West Texas in a 6th grade classroom, and they had a provider come in and do the abstinence only instruction to the children. And I always tell this story at this point. And I sat with the girls one time, and I sat with the boys. And the boys, this man came in, and he was older, and his pants are pulled up all the way over his navel. He's got that engineer shirt on, you know, with the pocket protector, you know, and he's telling them about he kept saying condoms fail. He repeated that several times, and 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 he would put a slide on the overhead that said, "You see, if you have sex," and it's like a slide of someone's diagram of a penis. You get this cut off. This is education to this provider, right?
Wow.
And then at the end, he allowed them to ask questions on note cards, and someone asked him if oral sex feels good, and he said no because you worry about getting an STD.
Okay.
And then they wonder why this region has the second highest repeat teen pregnancy rate in a state that leads the country in this. You discourage them from using contraception, you block access to contraception, and you're saying that you don't like abortion, but what other alternative is there for someone who is not ready to be a parent?
Well, because they want everybody to be a parent as early and as often as possible. That seems to be the logic, and so they will pass legislation to force doctors to deliberately deceive their patients, and this somehow is considered moral.
Yeah, it's a huge shame. You know, we've got a lot of work to do, regardless of the Supreme Court. You know, whatever they decide on Monday, the fight is going to go on, and I'm really appreciative of y'all having me on your show to have this opportunity to talk to your audience about what's happening in Texas and around the country. And I hate that I have to rush off. I've got another appointment I have to get to.
I understand, but what can people do to help?
So get involved. If you are, wherever you are, look and see if there's an abortion fund in your area. You can go to the National Network of Abortion Funds website, which is fundabortionnow.org. If you're in Texas, we'd love to get you involved with NARAL Pro-Choice Texas. That website is ProChoiceTexas, TEXAS.org. You get involved in whatever organization is in your community that is fighting this fight. Speak up if you've had an abortion and it's safe for you to do so. Start talking about it. That's how we're going to really change things in this country, is to remove that stigma, to fight back against it, to support, be proud to say, I'm pro-choice, I support access to abortion, I support people who have abortions. That's one way that you can really make a huge difference, and I think that's something that's made a difference in this case. Whole Women's Health v. Hellerstedt is the first time we saw, I think it was 41 or 43 appellate briefs, or amicus briefs to the court, from people who'd had abortions, professionals, people from all walks of life, saying, I had an abortion and that changed my life for the better, and I'm happy that I had access to abortion care, and please don't take away everyone else's access.
Yeah. Also, I saw here in Texas, everybody's planning in the different cities of Texas to meet somewhere if they pass the decision down. Is NARAL involved in that?
Yes, and we on our website, ProChoiceTexas.org, we have a blog post that lists all the cities and the locations and the information you need. Also on Tuesday night at 7 p.m. Central, there will be a telephone town hall with Wendy Davis, Amy Hagstrom Miller of Whole Women's Health, Elise Hogue of NARAL Pro-Choice America, Nancy Northup from the Center for Reproductive Rights, Yamani Hernandez from the National Network of Abortion Funds, and Jessica Gonzalez Rojas from the National Latina Institute for Reproductive Health. Some real amazing national powerhouse women on this call, and we want everyone to be invited to that call. Go to our website to find out how to sign up. ProChoiceTexas.org.
All right, well, thank you very much, Heather.
Thank you so much.
Busby. Pleasure having you on. I'm going to go ahead and close out the show, and I'm not going to give you any of the anecdotes because I've got a pile of them, but I know you have to be somewhere, so I'm going to let you be.
Thanks so much. Yeah, I appreciate it. Okay.